All teachers learn over time that there are certain words and phrases that can capture an entire room, and that there are others which are disadvantageous to even speak aloud. You can show an interest in a certain subject or a tangent, and it might be the perfect on-ramp for a class to have a stirring discussion. Or it can throw off the trajectory of an entire class or lesson. For me, I once had a student for whom free will was this Achilles heel. Anything related to predestination or God's plan for humanity or the nature of human choice would send them into a spiritual spiral which would ultimately lead them to the following quote, "Rabbi, for once and for all, just tell me, does Judaism believe in free will?" And often I would quote them this paradoxical verse from Pirkei Avot, "Hachol tafui," everything is foreseen, "v'harashut netuna," and freedom of choice is given. And their response, of which I was incredibly proud of, by the way, because I was the one who had introduced them to the Mishnah, was, "Yeah, but that's the rabbis. What about the Torah? What does the Torah have to say about free will?" And I'll be honest, until this week, I didn't actually have an answer for them. But that's the joy. That's the joy of being a student of Torah. It's the pleasure of reading and rereading Torah week after week. You learn new things, you discover new things, you are exposed to new things, and this is something I learned this week. And so, to that particular student, wherever you are, this Devar Torah is for you. As the sun has set, we have entered into Parshat Parah, Shabbat Parah, the Parsha of the red heifer. The Shabbat after Purim is always accompanied by the reading of this especially challenging and momentous ancient Levite ritual found in the book of Numbers. It details the ancient purification rite for removing the most intense form of spiritual decay, which is exposure to a dead body. A Levite or Kohen who has been so exposed cannot perform their duties. The essence of death is still too close to them. They must be purified through this special ritual, through an immersion and an anointing. And not only them. Anyone who has been so exposed cannot enter the holiest spaces of the Jewish world. First the Mishkan, and then the temple in Jerusalem. And so the Torah tells us about the pure red heifer, who does not have a hair different color, who is completely without blemish, that hasn't worked a day in its life, and that we have to take it and burn it until it's nothing but ashes. And the ashes will be part of the ritual, which removes this stain. And the timing of this reading is not a particularly great mystery. We read it as our hearts and our minds are naturally turning towards Pesach. Because in this time, in the time of the temple, Pesach, Passover, was one of the Shalosh Regalim, the three pilgrimage festivals, at which time it was required for the citizens of the land of Israel to make their journey to Jerusalem, to make offerings. And their purity and the purity of their priests was an important part of this time of year. And so when they read and heard this parsha, it was a grand alarm bell, a wake-up clock, as it were, that says, by the way, hey you, you, the one traveling to Jerusalem, you're going to need to do this when you get there. Or perhaps, more generally, hey, remember, time to go to Jerusalem. It's that time of year. And we don't live in that world anymore. The world doesn't work like that anymore. People do make pilgrimages today on Passover still, but they're almost universally to posh summer camps or deluxe resorts where you don't need to worry about your own house and you can just let someone else worry about hametz and let someone else cook for you the entire time. And if you've never been to one of those, well, maybe Bubby or Zadie's house is actually your version of that resort. But more than that, the temple is gone, and the sacrificial cult is gone. And even if it wasn't, if we could still say go up to the Temple Mount and make sacrificial offerings, well, there's still a problem. There's no more red heifers left. There's no red heifers left that are pure enough to be part of this ritual. So not only has this ritual ceased to be practiced, it has also ceased to be practicable. And yet, year after year, we read it anyways. We set aside a special Shabbat to examine and remember an ancient ritual which very few people can even imagine and even fewer feel connected to. So what can we possibly glean from this special Torah reading that is applicable to our lives? Or is this, in fact, the most irrelevant section of the Torah? And so we return to the question of free will. In his commentary on the prophet Ezekiel, which is the Haftarah to this week's Torah portion, Rav Hirsch writes pointedly that every human being eventually encounters a terrible truth. And that terrible truth is that life is finite. Death happens. And this truth can put a limit on our belief in free will. Because if I say I have control over myself, I must still acknowledge that I don't actually have control over the world around me. I don't have control over the fact that one day my life will end. And if I lack control over that element of my life, what other pieces of my life do I lack control in? Do I have any control at all? From the moment of my birth, which I didn't control, until the moment of my death, of which I will not control, I have nothing. Maybe I have nothing in the middle either. That's a challenging thought. But, says Rav Hirsch, the red heifer is actually a rejection of this powerlessness. Because the sacred ritual of the red heifer banishes the touch of death, even for a moment. It restores our ability to engage with the divine. It rejects the end of free will. It rejects the powerlessness that approaches us in the face of inevitability. And it reminds us that our moral free will to engage in our ancient rites and rituals is imperative. And not only is it imperative, but it is necessary. Our partnership and our actions, our free will is necessary to fulfill the sacred potential of the Torah. And so, yes, there are natural forces which are beyond our control, but the moral forces inside of ourselves are always within our grasp. I may not be able to change my fate, but I have the power to determine how I will live until that moment. Which is another way of saying that the fulfillment of the mitzvot and being commanded and choosing to fulfill those commandments is not actually a lack of agency, but it's actually the ultimate expression of free will. Because to be engaged with the Torah is to be engaged in life, to celebrate life. We see this in the world today, that there is a nihilism which comes from being exposed to too much death and too much loss and too much uncertainty. We can come to believe that we lack agency, that we lack power, that we lack purpose. And some people even come to embrace that nothing really matters, so I'll do whatever I want. And that last idea may even seem like freedom in the moment, but if you embrace it, if you embrace the idea that nothing matters, so I can do whatever I want, you lock yourself into a world where death controls your life, instead of your life controlling your life. And that is not really living. Letting death control your life is not really living. And so to that question then, that first question asked by my student, tell me, Rabbi, does the Torah believe in free will? Just tell me straight. Finally, thanks to studying this irrelevant mystery of the red heifer, I can actually answer you, yes. Yes, it does. The Torah does, in fact, believe in free will, and so do we. We have our freedom, and we have our freedom to embrace our mitzvot, and to sanctify our lives, and to thrive, even despite our lack of control over the entire world. We have the power, like we will tonight, to raise a glass and to offer up a l'chaim to life. And in each l'chaim, in every single cheer, we celebrate not only one more day of this beautiful world, but we celebrate our choice to choose life once more. Shabbat Shalom.